Hey Phoebe, thank you so much for including your work here. The first thing you probably notice here is that I don't have your work up in the window, and I did that for a reason. And let me show you the reason why. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to click this to open your presentation, and we can see the presentation isn't oriented so that the viewer can see it, which would mean that the viewer would have to do a little bit of work to get this properly oriented. So the reason that I bring that up and the reason it's relevant is this, and let me just do this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to download this, and then we'll open it up in Acrobat. So let's just go ahead and download it. And the reason I'm doing this, and the reason this is relevant, is the following. Whenever you're setting something up for, here we go. Okay, so as we can see, it's oriented incorrectly. And another reason I did this is because I want to show you something. So the reason I bring this up is because whenever you're in presentation, you really want to make it as easy for the viewer as possible to look at the work. So the viewer shouldn't have to do any work at all in order to see and accurately view the work. So you want to make sure that you're oriented correctly. So of course you would save this. And what I'll do here is I'll just go, actually, you know what? I'm just going to go back and open this in Chrome, in the browser. So let's just go ahead and do that. Okay, so, boy, I forgot to do one thing. I want to show you one thing. So let me open that PDF back up. So we'll go to view and we'll just go ahead and rotate clockwise, view, rotate clockwise, and one more time. So you see, as you can see, it takes a little bit of work to get this oriented correctly. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to come down here, and the reason I wanted to open it in Acrobat is so we can come down here and take a look at the size. We're at 11 by 8.5. Now don't forget that the destination size here is 11 by 17 or 17 by 11, whichever you elect to present in a vertical or horizontal orientation. So the one thing I want to do now at this point is I want to back down here a little bit because we see that this file has, I'm not real sure what's happening here, but you don't have color bleeding the entire size of the composition. So I'm not real sure why that, or I'm a little confused here as to how this works. Right now it looks like this is the poster, but I'm not sure why it has these kind of white stripes on the backs and the top, the bottom, and both sides. So think about that. And again, remember 11 by 17. So you definitely want to orient this accordingly. At this point, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this and we'll just go ahead and open it in the browser. And we can take a look. So let's go ahead and go do that. And we'll just go ahead and reduce the size here. Now, a couple of things, I have some questions here, and I want you to really think about some things here. So one of the things I think that's happening here is that we've got a few things that need to be questioned. And the main thing is this and the reason I bring this up, and if you've watched some of the other videos thus far, what I'm trying to drive home here this week is the fact that all of your decisions have to have good sound reasoning behind them. So theoretically, you should be able to answer questions readily as to why you use this typeface, why you use the color, and why you use center alignment. So quite typically, those are questions that come up. I mean, I ask those questions on a regular basis when I'm reviewing work of a potential entry-level designer for my firm, or even if I'm farming out work and I'm using other designers, or even with interns. If I'm looking at a portfolio, I ask a lot of questions. And so a lot of the questions I ask are, can you describe the reasoning behind your color choices in this particular piece? If the designer can't answer the question, as far as I'm concerned, the interview is over. I'm going to move on to the next designer, somebody who can really communicate and really show that they have reasoning for every decision made in any particular design piece. Okay, and that's really relevant. The only reason I bring that up is because it's going to happen when you graduate, when you have portfolio reviewers looking at the work, and also when you have potential hiring professionals looking at the work. Just be ready to be bombarded with questions, and all of those questions need to have answers. So that being said, my first question is, what is the significance of the typeface? Does it have ties to your concept? Does it have ties to the subject matter? What is your reasoning for the color palette thus far? Okay, again, does it have any kind of conceptual ties to the subject matter or the individual laureate that you're representing here? Okay, so food for thought, right? So when you design, be ready to answer those questions and have good reasons for using those uh, for those decisions. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the layout itself. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that, and I'm going to ask this question, and you should be able to answer this question in your head because we've gone through it so many times, right? So what is the inherent danger of using center placement, center aligned composition? And you should be able to rattle off, you should be able to say, you should be saying inside your head right now, you should be saying, well, because it doesn't activate negative space effectively. And you're exactly right. Center aligned composition creates symmetry. And this symmetry is not the most interesting thing in design. Think about this. Think about landscape design. Think about landscaping. So you have the house, you have the front door, you have the same tree that you have here over here. Then you have the same bush here and here. Then you have the same flower here and here. So is that interesting, or would it be more interesting to have a different tree? Maybe a big tree here, a small tree here, a wisp of grass here, a flower here. Do you see what I'm saying? So symmetry is typically not the most interesting thing in design. So specifically in graphic design, in a composition like this, and the main reason, of course, as I said, it does not do anything to activate the negative space associated with the composition. So think about that. Now, as far as conceptual development goes, there's a couple of things here that are competing, all right? So you've got the gender symbol associated here, saying what? That she is female, right? But I mean, we can kind of see that a couple of ways before we even get to that. We see a woman, and then we see Dorothy, her name. So we know by the time the viewer sees this, we know she's of female. We know, I'm sorry, excuse me. We know she's female, right? So and plus this doesn't fit with the typeface, being the typeface has these variable strokes with this pretty heavy diagonal axis. But this is just a monostroke little cross at the bottom to indicate that female symbol, right? So I don't think that's executed specifically as well as it could be. I would caution using this because right now this is diluting what you have here. So you've taken this crystal and replaced the O, right? So basically, these are competing. You have two different concepts going on here. So the viewer there's this thing called Hicks' law, and Hicks' law dictates it. Basically, Hicks' law says that every time you add something to a composition, you take away from what's already there. And I think this is a great example because you're diminishing the impact of this crystal using this kind of replacement, replacing the crystal for the letter. You're kind of diluting that effect by adding this. Okay, and that's a great example of Hicks' law. Again, every time you add something to a composition, you're kind of taking away from what's already there. So I'm not so sure I agree with both of these elements. I think this is more relevant to the subject matter. The problem with the execution here is that that's the little illustration of the crystal, which works because you're using it typographically. However, for someone who's not interested in this specific laureate, this could be, theoretically, it could be an I for Hodkin. It could be a U, Hodkun. It could be an A, Hodkan. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not specifically clear what that letter is. So at the very least, I would adjust that to make it really clear as to what that letter is. Now let's talk about these elements right here. These elements right here are illustrative. And don't forget, all meaning in this piece should be created typographically. So these, I would exclude these. There's enough right here to create meaning once you kind of adjust that a little bit based on my comments. As far as your typography goes, I think that you could definitely adjust some kerning here. So for example, look how tight that is right there. This, the space between the D and the K. And these are all pretty loose up here. This is pretty loosely kerned up here, but this is really super tight, specifically the space between the D and the K. So you definitely want to adjust your kerning. Now this would be tracking, and the kerning is individual space between individual letters. Tracking is the overall space between letters themselves. I would increase the tracking here because these letters are so tight together that it's almost difficult to read. The other thing is that I'm not real sure if this has been, it almost looks like it's, these letter forms almost look like they're distorted a little bit. So that would point to of not constraining the original proportions and resizing the text box after you have placed it. And remember now, you have to constrain the original proportions. Anytime you resize type at all, you never want to distort type ever. So if you're going to change the vertical axis, you have to change the horizontal axis accordingly. Another thing, this typeface here is it's the execution here. I think it could be further developed. And let me just grab my straight edge to show you what I mean. So you've got this arc, but the arc isn't even. So we can see the arc really dips a lot lower on the left side than the right side. And to do that, I'll place this straight edge right underneath the baseline for the Y. And we can see that, yes, indeed, this is way, way lower. So that's not even. That should be an even arc in itself. Okay, so my final comment is that again, that this negative space, this comment on negative space. So if you were to change the orientation of this page so that maybe you were to place this somewhere else other than dead center to activate the negative space, then we're problematic, right? Because if we place this, let's say we place this over here, well, the arc's not going to fit, so you would have to recompose that subtype right there. As far as the types, this phrase right here is a little bit difficult. It's a little bit misleading because you're saying a woman who changed the science of X-ray crystallography. Now, that's assuming just by sheer nature of grammar, you're saying a woman. That's kind of indicating that there is more than one, that there are other women who changed. Now, since Dorothy Hodgkin won a Nobel Prize for this, I would say it would be more applicable and appropriate to say the woman who changed the science of X-ray crystallography. Okay, so those are my comments. Now, the main thing here is to let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or need further clarification on anything I've said in the last 12 minutes or so. So please let me know, and please let me know if you have any questions whatsoever. But I'd like to see these issues addressed, and you can repost right in here if you want. Go right ahead. I'll be glad to make further comments. Every post you give, I'm going to give you comments. So if you want to keep working, I'll keep working. Remember back in week 1, my student promise was when you're working, I'm working. So, and I mean that. So if you post 10 times to here, I'm going to give you 10 critiques. So don't think that it's one and done, right? Okay. So at this point, again, as I said, the most important thing is to get with me for any questions at all. All right. Thank you very much. And at this point, yeah, we'll just take it from here. All right. So, thank you very much, Phoebe. Great start, and please consider my comments, and of course, get with me with any questions. So thank you very much.